Hey y'all, it's Lola the Manager, your new favorite project manager, tech junkie, and entrepreneur. This is episode 14 of Life as a Project Manager. If you have been tuning into this series, you know that we have been working on a mock project, which is a restaurant website launch. I started off with a project brief, used that to create a project charter. With that charter, I used it to create a project schedule. With that project schedule, I started to develop my resource management plan. With the information from my resource management plan, I went and curated a communication plan, and now we are developing a risk management plan. So you guessed it, today's episode is about risk management. Let's get into it. Before we get into risk management, let's define what a risk is. A risk is an uncertain event that may or may not occur during your project. So it is anything that can potentially impact your project's timeline, the budget, the scope, whatever your case may be, in a positive or a negative way. We say positive because those are opportunities, and we say negative because those are threats. And we'll get into that later in this video. So what is a risk management plan? A risk management plan is the process of identifying potential risks and developing a mitigation strategy to respond to those risks. To mitigate means to minimize or reduce some type of loss. So in a risk management plan, you want to minimize or reduce the impact and or the probability of that risk even occurring. Now you're probably wondering, how do I even identify these risks? I believe there are three basic ways that you can start in your risk identification process. The first way would be to review or look at previous projects that were similar to this project. For instance, we are developing a restaurant website launch. Has the company had any other projects just like this that required a website launch or an app launch or some type of launch in the past? Do they have something like that? At the companies that you're working for, you may be brought on for one specific project that they've never completed ever before in life, or it's a continuation of something they've done in the past, so you have a baseline to work with. You would review those projects and see what type of risks they outline, and then use that as your baseline for the risks that you'll outline in this project. The next way you can identify a risk is doing a SWOT analysis, S-W-O-T. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. To conduct your SWOT analysis, you're going to reach out to different subject matter experts within the company, different stakeholders within the company, different people just within the company as a whole, or in the industry, depending on where you are. And you're going to come together and you're going to identify the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats to this project. So when you were given this project, you were given a business case or a brief in which it allowed you to understand in more depth the purpose behind this project, the why behind it, the impact, the significance, right? So you know that at the end of the day, this project is solving some type of problem that the company has. However, you want to identify what potential risk you may face when dealing with this type of project, this type of problem that you're solving. And so the SWOT analysis is going to allow you to kind of see all aspects of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of solving this problem, of the technology needed, of the financial resources needed, the people needed, the industry. You're looking at your competitors. You're doing a full assessment of this project in order to highlight any type of risk that you guys need to be mindful of. And the last way, which you're also going to see in our sample risk management plan that I'll get to later, is using a prompt list, right? So there are certain things that can be impacted on every type of project. It doesn't matter. For instance, scope creep, right? Every project has a scope, and there's always a risk to your scope. You can start there and analyze what in this project can potentially impact the scope that can cause scope creep. Every project has a budget, right? There's money involved in it, no matter how small or how big. You can use that as a starting point to figure out what can potentially impact the budget, as well as a schedule. Every project has a schedule. There's a timeline in which we want to get this done and out the door. Let's assess what type of risk can impact that. In the sample risk management plan that we'll review, you'll see different prompts to kind of work with that'll help you start learning how to identify risk or how to start asking questions about different risks to see if that's going to impact your project. So after you've done all that and you've identified these different risks, what do you do now? You're going to develop something called a probability impact matrix, right? When I say matrix, I mean chart. So you're going to take the list of risks that you've identified and you want to evaluate and assess how significant is this risk? What's the likelihood of this risk even occurring? Those elements are going to develop a risk score. That risk score is what's going to then help you decide how do you want to tackle this risk. So a probability impact matrix is exactly what it sounds like. It is a grid, a table, a chart that shows the probability as well as the impact of that risk occurring in order to develop a score, a risk score, and then using that score to help you determine how should you handle this risk. How are we going to respond to this risk? Now, when I say we need to figure out how we're going to respond to this risk, there are 4 different types of mitigation strategies when you are assessing the risk to your project. The first one is to mitigate. When you decide that you want to mitigate a risk, that means you are going to take the necessary actions to reduce the probability and the impact of this risk. That means you fully understand that this risk is likely to happen. What we want to do is minimize the impact for when that happens. So for my people in Florida, we have hurricanes over here. We know we're going to have hurricanes. Our response to hurricanes is mitigation. And there are several ways we mitigate that. One of the ways is, okay, we know that this hurricane is going to come. So what we want to do is board up our windows to minimize the impact to our windows, to our home. Or we want to go to a shelter to minimize us being potentially harmed in this space during this hurricane if it hits us really hard. So that's what we mean when we say mitigate. The next thing is we want to completely avoid the risk, meaning we do not want this risk to happen. So we're going to do everything in our power to eliminate the risk entirely by changing the project plans or even changing the project requirements. Like we need to shift gears completely because we do not want this type of risk. The next one is transfer. So you want to shift the ownership or the impact to a third party. So if we go back to our example with the hurricane, right? We know that we're going to get hit. And so we're not going to worry about this. The insurance company can deal with it when it's over, right? So that's us transferring the ownership and the impact. Lastly, accept. To accept the risk means you acknowledge that this risk is coming. There's no way we can stop it. And we really can't even mitigate it or reduce the impact that it's going to have. So now what we want to do is focusing on the consequences of that risk. Going back to our hurricane example, there's no way this hurricane is not coming. It is going to hit us head on and we are probably going to lose our house. So what we want to do is just make sure our insurance information is up to date, and we want to start looking for some Airbnb, some short-term rentals for us to stay. Let's make sure we take all of our equipment when we leave because we're probably going to be without housing for a while. That's what it means to accept. Now that we completely understand how to identify risks, how to score them to see the probability and the impact they would have, and then decide what type of mitigation strategies we have, let's go to the computer and look at a sample risk management plan. Y'all, we have been doing a really good job in building out our project management plan. Like, look at all these different tabs at the bottom. We got our project schedule with the work breakdown structure. We got our resource management plan. We have our communication plan. And today we are tapping into our risk management plan. So I'm not gonna hold you. Let's get right into it so we can kind of look at risk. In the main video, I highlighted how you identify these risks and you have like these lists of risks that you take to go develop a probability impact matrix. And so what I have on the right side of my screen in columns J through O are pretty much samples of what a probability impact matrix is. It's pretty bare bones and basic. It's you looking at the likelihood of something, if it's high, medium, or low. And then you're also looking at the impact of it. Is it low, medium, or high, right? And so you might see them very basic as what you see at the bottom. And then you may see these matrices have different scores within them to kind of help you better understand how to create your risk score. So everyone's probability impact matrix is different. You may have 5 different categories in which you are working with, and you may just have 3 very basic: low, medium, high. You may not even have numbers involved. It really depends on what company you're with that determines how they want their risk management plans done. And I just want to start by saying that in order to get the risk score, you would take a number that the probability falls under, as well as the number that the impact falls under, and then that's how you get your score. So if there's a risk that has a likely probability of happening, that's a 4, but the impact is pretty minor, that's a 2. We multiply that and we get an 8. So then when we take this 8, we look at, is it considered low, moderate, or high? Well, it's considered a moderate risk because it falls under this risk score category range. All right, so let's get into the risk in our restaurant website launch. So in line 3, we have our risk highlighted as scope creep. Remember, I told you that one of the ways to identify risk is to use a prompt list, right? So there's certain categories that can always be potentially impacted by some type of risk. And scope creep is one of them. Resource constraints, technical challenges. Some of these things are kind of related specifically to the project. So like the content delays and stuff like that. Stakeholder dissatisfaction, that may happen on any project that you have because every project has a stakeholder. You have budget overruns, deployment issues, meaning having issues when it's time to launch or having issues after it launches. So these are very basic, bare bone prompt lists that you can consider in every type of project that you have, right? And then as you grow in your understanding of how projects work within the environment and the industry that you're in or within your company, then you'll be able to kind of identify some more specific risks for your project. So let's get back to scope creep. And the description is uncontrolled changes to project scope leading to schedule delays and budget overruns. So the probability of this happening is medium and the impact is high, which gives us a high score. So let's say this is going to be a 16, right? The probability of it happening is maybe, so maybe it's like at a possible, right? Or a likely. And then the impact is high, so it's probably at a major or a catastrophic. If the risk number is 16, so it landed kind of like here. So just kind of showing you how that number was developed. And then the response to this strategy is to mitigate. If you remember, when we decide to mitigate, we are aware that this can potentially happen. So what we want to do is to reduce or minimize the impact and or probability of this happening. So the strategy is to clearly define the scope, change, control processes, and obtain sign-offs, right? In our contingency plan, meaning our backup plan, in the event that this, could happen, we want to reprioritize our requirements and adjust timeline and resources. And then we see this column here that says owner, project manager. So in a risk management plan, someone needs to own the risk. So if the risk happens, who is the one that has to take the necessary steps to begin implementing the mitigation strategy that we want to implement, right? So for scope creep, it makes sense for the project manager to do it because the project manager is the owner of the scope documentation, the project, and all that type of stuff. Next up, we have resource constraints. So unavailability or loss of key resources like personnel, equipment, or materials. So the probability of this happening is low. So we can look at that as something like rare or maybe unlikely, but the impact is significantly high. So it's rare that people may end up being unavailable or we may lose people. But if we do lose them or if they do become unavailable, that impacts our project entirely. So that might be considered catastrophic or major, right? So here the risk score is 12. The response strategy is to mitigate. So we want to develop backup plans, cross-train team members, secure additional resources. So the idea here is let's come up with our contingency plan on what to do in the event that we will not have some resources. Let's cross-train team members. So instead of just solely relying on the designer, let's teach some other people design so they can help with this. Or let's secure additional resources. Hey, let's try to pull some designers from some other departments to kind of be back up here. Contingency plan is to outsource or hire temporary resources. So if somebody isn't available, then let's reach out to maybe like another freelance company to get some backup person to kind of help us for a couple days, a couple weeks, whatever the case is. Or let's adjust the timelines. If time is on our side and the availability of that resource is going to come back within like a week or so, then maybe we can adjust the timelines to accommodate their absence. And this is owned by project manager and team leads. So I remember in our resource management plan conversation, I talked about how there is something called functional managers, right? So functional managers are pretty much the managers of these different departments that you are borrowing resources from. So for this project, we have designers, we have developers, we have content specialists, we have all these different people, but they are not our employees. They work for different departments. Maybe somebody works in the marketing, maybe somebody works in the graphic design, maybe somebody works with the engineering team. Like they have these different managers that they report to, and you as a project manager, you reach out to these team leads for the resource and they assign you the resource that they have available. So that's why this is something that the project manager and the team lead would work together to figure out how they're going to mitigate the resource issue. Line 5, we have our technical challenges. So these are unforeseen technical issues and limitations during development. So we're developing a website. There might be something that's happening on the back end. There might be something that's happening with the hosting site in general that's out of our hands. Or there might be something where our developer sees it and realizes they can't do what they know how to do because of the platform that we're using. We might have different issues. So the probability of this happening is medium. So maybe possible, unlikely. And then the impact is moderate, major, so medium. And so when we do the calculation, so let's say possible 3, moderate 3, that gives us a 9. Our response strategy is to mitigate. So we want to conduct thorough technology evaluations, leverage proven frameworks and tools. So we want to make sure that we've assessed everything before we even decided to use this type of technology. Contingency plan is to allocate additional developmental time, seek external expertise. So it might be a limitation where like no one in the company even knows what's happening. We may need to go seek out some expertise somewhere else, some consultant to provide some input, or we may just want to extend the timeline. Maybe we have some wiggle room that allows us to extend it so there's more time to develop and work through these challenges. This is owned by the developers and the project manager. Integration issues. So difficulties in integrating third-party services like payment gateways, social media APIs, and stuff like that. Remember, in this mock project, we are building a website, right? If this is a restaurant website, there has to be some type of system for people to pay, right? There has to be social media assets that allows people to connect to our social media pages, the restaurant social media pages. Maybe you need to connect in order for people to send emails, like whatever the case is, there may be something wrong with the integration, right? So the probability of this happening, medium, the impact, medium, and we're gonna conduct compatibility testing, maintain open communication with vendors. So before we even decide what third-party service we want to use, we want to make sure that it can actually work for us. And then we're going to do some testing to make sure it works, right? Then you have your contingency plan, which is to explore alternative integration options, adjust scope or timelines, right? So we are probably, and this is owned by developers and project managers. So when we are planning this website, we have probably decided, hey, we want to use this. However, we want to have a list already kind of set up with other options that we know work. So we've already kind of tested these other options. We know they work. So in the event that our main option isn't going to work for us, we can swiftly adjust because we've already done the legwork. Now, security vulnerabilities. There's potential security risks or breaches in the website or systems. Remember, this is a restaurant website. If people are putting online orders, there's credit card information on there, right? There's probably addresses on there if delivery is available. So there you have the ability to potentially get hacked in somehow. So the probability of this happening is low, so it's probably rare, but the impact is significantly high because of what they may be able to do with that information and having everyone's security compromised is a significant vulnerability. So we want to mitigate, meaning we want to implement some type of security practices, conduct regular security testing and audits. So we want to make sure that on our side, we know that we put everything in place to not have this issue. However, our contingency plan is to engage security experts, patch vulnerabilities, implement additional security measures. So we're going to bring in the experts. We're going to call the cybersecurity professionals. We're going to have them do an assessment. When we say patch vulnerabilities, meaning, hey, can you test to see how our things are operating? And if you see any vulnerabilities, let us know. So what needs to be adjusted and how we need to make those adjustments. And then if we need to add additional security things, we will. And this is the responsibility of the developers, the QA testers. Remember, QA stands for quality assurance, and then the project managers. So they all own that. Then we have our content delays. So delays in content creation or approvals impacting website launch. So understand that with the content, there's pictures and images and words and videos and graphics and all these different things that go on a website. And there's a process in which it needs to be ideated, meaning come up with the plan or the idea of what we want to develop. Then we're going to go design it. Then we need it to get reviewed and approved. And then we can go and put it on the site. So there might be some impact or delays in just that approval process. And if it takes a minute to get approved, then it can significantly impact when we actually go live. So that's why the probability and the impact here are medium. And to mitigate this, we want to set clear content deadlines and involve subject matter experts early. So we want to get the specialists in from the beginning, and then we want to make sure everyone understands the deadlines from the beginning so that we are not waiting for things last minute. However, our contingency plan is to prioritize critical content and adjust the launch timeline. So critical content. So maybe we don't need the image of the pizza, but we do need a list of the different items on our menu. Right? The different items that we serve. We do need the menu, but we don't need the picture of the food, right? So that's what it's like by prioritizing critical content. And this is owned by the content creator and the project manager. I don't know if you see the cadence here, but project manager owns the risk management plan. And so they own the risk. And so it's their job to kind of monitor and then also reach out to the other people that are responsible for that risk also. Stakeholder dissatisfaction, so failure to meet stakeholder expectations or requirements. The likelihood is low, right? It's very low to not meet the stakeholders' expectations because they literally tell you from the jump exactly what they want. But this is a significant impact because if we don't meet their needs, then we might be SOL. Okay, we might experience some trouble that we did not want to. We may have feel like we've wasted a lot of money and we have to kind of go back to the drawing board and get to this. And so we don't want that. But in the event that the stakeholders are dissatisfied, we want to actually mitigate this. So we're going to mitigate this by making sure that we maintain regular communication with our stakeholders, and we want to involve them in the review and the decision making. So we don't want them to be surprised at the end. We want to involve them in this process so they are on the journey with us. So when they get the end result, they are not surprised because they've already had time to engage with it in these reviews. And our contingency plan will be to identify and address concerns, escalate issues, or to project sponsor. So we want to, our backup plan is if somehow we ended up dissatisfying them, we want to kind of identify and address what were the concerns? Like what's the actual issue that you feel happened? Like why do you feel like we didn't meet your expectation, right? And then if it can't be rectified there, then you're gonna escalate it to the next person on top of the chopping block, right? And this is owned by you as a project manager because one of the main things that you own is the deliverables, right? So the actual thing that's being delivered at the end of the project, you own that. And so if the stakeholder is not satisfied, that's a you thing because were you communicating with your stakeholder? Were you including them in things? Did you make sure that they were aware of what was going on, right? Line 10, we have our budget overruns, right? Budget overruns, so project costs exceeding the approved budget. Now, the probability and impact of this is very medium. So there's a chance, a 50-50 chance that you may go over budget, and there's a 50-50 chance that you going over budget actually impacts this entire project. And so to mitigate this, we want to implement strict cost control measures, regularly monitor and report on expenditures. So when we say strict cost control measures, like we are monitoring every dollar, we want to know where everything is going. We are monitoring every dollar. We want to know where everything is going. We want to make sure that we have some type of system, maybe like an approval process before anything is purchased, just to ensure that we are constantly staying within budget. Now, the contingency plan is if somehow we end up going over budget, then we're going to have to reprioritize the requirements, see if we can get some additional funding, and potentially have to adjust the scope in order to meet the needs of the project sponsor. And so this is owned by the project manager and the finance team. So whoever's over all the monies, the accountant, whatever that may look like. Now, deployment issues, deployment means launch, right? So we deploy this out into production, into the world. We launch this into the world. So description are problems or delays during website deployment to the live environment. So this is in regarding our website. This would mean that we push the publish button, but then we're having an issue where it's not showing up on your end, but it's showing up on my end, or it's showing up on mobile, but it's not showing up on desktop. Like, that's what we mean. Now, the probability of this is significantly low. However, the impact is high, because if we're going to say that our website is launching Tuesday at 3 p.m., it needs to be live at Tuesday at 3 p.m. You get what I'm saying? Now, our response strategy is to conduct thorough testing. So this is the part where we're going to make sure we test on top of test on top of test. We're going to test it via mobile. We're going to test it via desktop. We want to make sure no matter how you experience our website, that it works. We're going to develop deployment checklists and rollback plans. So in software development, we develop these software, we do these different integrations, we do these different type of tech projects. And one of the things that happens is we want to deploy or launch this new thing, but we're just having so many issues that it actually would make sense if we just roll back to what it originally was, right? And so we need to come up with, what does that look like? What does the rollback plan looks like? And then our contingency plan is, we're going to allocate additional deployment time, engage external support. So maybe the issues that we're having with the deployment is something we could bring a third party to come kind of help assess, a consultant to come kind of help us figure that out. Or we may just need to, we can work on it, but we need to extend the deadline. We need to adjust our launch date. So let's say, hey, we're having issues, we're going to relaunch on Friday type of thing. And this is owned by the project manager and developers. And then the post-launch issues. So unforeseen issues or technical problems after the website has launched. So after whatever project you have has went live into the world, there may be some issues that pop up. There's a 50-50 chance it may happen, but the impact, depending on what it is, it may be high, maybe low, maybe medium. So here we want to implement some monitoring and support processes and maintain a bug backlog. So what that looks like is we come up with a plan for how this is going to be monitored after the project after the project ends. So right now, we're all in the development phase, right? We're in the development process of this project. However, once the team that came together to develop this website project, once that is done, this website has to be transitioned over to maybe an operations team. These are the people that are going to handle all the bugs and things that happen on the daily. They're monitoring the site to see what's going on, and they'll make updates and stuff like that. That's a process that needs to be developed. Like, that's the support that they're going to get after. So we were working with the stakeholders to kind of build this, but now when they have issues, they're not coming to the project team. They're coming to whoever is maintaining that site, maintaining this project. So the contingency plan is to allocate resources for issue resolution or rollback if necessary. So let's say the issues are just so problematic that it just makes sense to roll back to what we originally had. We may do that, or we may just kind of figure out who's going to be responsible for addressing these type of issues that come in on the monitoring side. And this is owned by our developers and project managers. So when you are creating your risk management plan, you want to list out your risks. You need a brief description of the risk, nothing too major. Highlight the probability, the impact, and the risk. Like, this right here is your probability impact matrix, right? So it's listed here, but you'll also see it on this side with the chart format. You have your response strategy. You have your response strategy. So are you going to mitigate? Are you going to accept? Are you going to transfer? Are you going to, what was the other one? I forgot what that was. Yeah. Are you going to mitigate, avoid, transfer, or, oh my God. Are you going to mitigate, avoid, transfer, or accept the risk? So what are you going to do? Your backup plan. So in the event that the risk actually happened, what is it that we're going to do to move forward, right? And then the owner. So who's responsible for executing the response strategy? And that is risk management. I really hope you guys learn something new. You like it. Feel free to take a screenshot of what this chart looks like so you can use it in the future. But that's risk management. Now let's wrap up our last video. Whew. Thank you guys for tuning in to this week's episode of Life as a Project Manager. I know that project management, it sounds hard and it looks like there's a lot of work, but once you understand the basics, baby, it is smooth sailing. You feel me? Be sure to follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter at Lola the Manager. Make sure you drop all your questions, comments, concerns in the comment section. I want to see it. I want to answer it. I want to talk. I want to engage. Let's nurture this community that we have developed. And lastly, I have to thank you for tuning in, because you can literally be anywhere in the world right now, but you're here with me getting professional development on project management, and I love that for us. As always, until next time.